There is one aircraft in history so fast that when an enemy fired a missile at it, the pilots didn't dodge, didn't dive, didn't panic. They simply pushed the throttle forward and left the missile behind. Over 4,000 missiles were launched at this plane across its career. Not a single one ever touched it. It flew at more than 3 times the speed of sound, 16 miles above the Earth, so fast that its skin glowed with heat and the entire airframe stretched several inches longer in flight. By every measure that exists, it was untouchable. The fastest jet the world has ever built, before or since. And then, in the 1990s, the United States did something that still makes no sense to most people. It killed it, deliberately. While choosing to keep flying the slow, ancient spy plane this one had been built to replace. Why retire the fastest plane in history, then destroy the very tools needed to ever build it again? The answer has nothing to do with the enemy. This is the SR-71 Blackbird, the plane nothing in the sky could ever catch, brought down by the one thing it could never outrun. The plane that outran every missile. Start with the thing that made it a legend. The Blackbird could not be shot down. It carried no guns, no missiles, no countermeasures, no defenses of any kind. It was designed not to fight, but to flee. When an enemy surface-to-air missile site managed to lock on and fire, the SR-71's entire defensive procedure was almost insulting in its simplicity. Accelerate, climb, and watch the missile run out of energy far below and behind. At over Mach 3, it was faster than the missiles chasing it, faster even than the Soviet Union's quickest interceptor. The Blackbird had no weapons of any kind. Its only defense was speed, and speed alone made it untouchable for 3 decades. Across its entire career, more than 4,000 missiles were fired at it, and not one ever brought it down. The only Blackbirds ever lost were lost to accidents, never to an enemy. But flying that fast, that high, created problems no engineer had ever faced. And the first of them was the metal itself. Built from the enemy's own metal. At 3 times the speed of sound, air friction alone would have melted an ordinary aluminum plane like a candle. The Blackbird needed a metal that could survive being baked to hundreds of degrees on every flight, and only one would do: titanium. There was just one problem. In the 1960s, the United States didn't have nearly enough of it. The world's largest supply of high-grade titanium sat inside the borders of its single greatest enemy, the Soviet Union. So, the CIA did something audacious, using a web of fake companies and foreign middlemen, one reportedly posing as a maker of pizza ovens. American intelligence quietly bought tons of titanium directly from the Soviets, who had no idea what it was for. The most secret American aircraft of the Cold War was built, almost entirely, out of metal bought in secret from the very country it was designed to spy on. The Soviet Union, in effect, helped manufacture the plane that would photograph its every secret. And that exotic metal forced one of the strangest design choices in aviation history: the jet that leaked fuel on purpose. If you had walked up to an SR-71 sitting on the runway, you'd have seen something alarming: fuel dripping steadily onto the concrete beneath it. The fastest plane ever built leaked like a rusted-out truck. And it was supposed to. Here's why. At Mach 3, the airframe heats so violently that the entire plane expands, growing 3 to 4 inches longer in flight. If the titanium panels had been bolted together tightly on the ground, that heat would have buckled and torn the aircraft apart. So, Lockheed fitted the panels deliberately loose, with gaps at every seam. Gaps that leaked fuel while the plane was cold, and sealed perfectly shut once the heat of Mach 3 expanded the metal. The fastest plane ever built was designed to leak fuel all over the runway, because the only way to survive Mach 3 was to build it loose and let the heat weld it shut. It even took off nearly empty and refueled in the air minutes later. And every one of these miracles came at a price that would eventually be its undoing. Every flight was a space launch. No enemy ever beat the Blackbird, but keeping it in the air was a nightmare, almost beyond belief. You couldn't simply scramble an SR-71 the way you scramble a fighter. Each mission was less like a flight and more like a space launch. It needed hours of preparation, a small army of specialists, and a crew of 2 sealed into full-pressure suits like astronauts, breathing pure oxygen before they even climbed into the cockpit. Then there was the fuel. The Blackbird drank a unique, specially made fuel that no other aircraft on Earth used, and it cost roughly 3 times as much as the fuel that filled an airliner. That fuel was so stable that it couldn't be lit by an ordinary spark. The engines had to be ignited with a squirt of a rare chemical that burst into green flame. And only one fleet of specially modified tankers, flown by the single group of crews on Earth cleared to do it, could refuel the plane in midair, multiple times, every single mission. If a Blackbird ever landed somewhere that didn't stock its exotic fuel, those tankers had to fly the fuel out to it. No enemy ever found a way to stop the Blackbird. But every flight cost a fortune and a small army, and that was the one weakness no missile could ever be. The plane that couldn't be beaten in the sky was slowly being beaten on a spreadsheet. And by the 1990s, that arithmetic finally caught up with it. The murder of the fastest plane. Ever by the early 1990s, the Cold War was over, budgets were shrinking, and a new generation of spy satellites could photograph the Earth from orbit. No fuel train, no tankers, no pilot's life on the line. To the people who controlled the money, the Blackbird suddenly looked like a magnificent, monstrously expensive luxury. So they killed it. Not because anything could catch it, nothing ever had, but because it cost too much to fly. The first retirement came around 1990. Then something telling happened. Again and again, commanders facing a sudden crisis discovered that nothing on Earth could rush a camera over a distant, defended target and survive there as fast as the Blackbird. The pressure to bring it back grew so strong that Congress forced a handful of them into service again in the mid-1990s. But the bill always won the argument in the end. Before the decade was out, the fastest aircraft in human history was retired for good. The SR-71 was never shot down, never outrun, never beaten in the air. It was killed by an accountant's pen, and the final twist is the darkest of all. Years earlier, the government had ordered the specialized tooling used to build the Blackbird to be deliberately destroyed. No jigs left, no dies, no blueprints in a usable form, no way back. They didn't just retire the fastest plane ever made, they made absolutely certain it could never be built again. The slow one won. And here is the cruelest irony of all. The plane the Blackbird was built to replace, the slow, fragile half-glider U-2, is still flying today, 70 years after it first took off. The Mach 3 monster, the fastest thing humanity ever put into the sky, now sits silent in museums, still quietly dripping fuel onto the concrete beneath it. The glider it was supposed to bury is still up there, still watching. Because in the end, the military didn't actually want the fastest plane in the world. It wanted the one it could afford to fly tomorrow, and the day after, and the decade after that. The fastest aircraft in history lost the race to the slowest spy plane it was built to bury, because being untouchable turned out to be worth far less than being affordable. So that's the strange, tragic story of the Blackbird. Built from metal secretly bought off its own enemy, designed to leak fuel on the ground and seal itself shut in the sky. It outran 4,000 missiles and was never once beaten by a hostile shot. And it was killed anyway, not by a foe, but by its own staggering cost, then buried so completely it can never return. The SR-71 is the ultimate proof of a hard truth about war and machines. The best one doesn't always win. Sometimes the winner is simply the one you can still afford to fly tomorrow. But before the Blackbird, there was an even more secret plane, a CIA aircraft so classified that for years, the public didn't even know it existed. That's the story we're telling next. You won't want to miss it. Stick around.